Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes, 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. One of my viewers came up with a scenario that I found to be quite interesting. And the viewer wanted me to talk about how the 5 generations of the baby boomers, Gen Xers, Millennials, Gen Z, and Generation Alpha would be able to survive the hard eras of World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. And he wanted to know how these 5 generations would be able to deal with these times or even be prepared to deal with them. Now, this is a very interesting scenario, and it's one that I think that I could make some observations on, because each of these generations came up in very good times. They never had to deal with any sort of war, and they never had to deal with any sort of the struggles that our fathers and grandfathers dealt with over a century ago. Now, when it comes down to the baby boomers, I think that this would be the generation that would have it the toughest as related to dealing with the eras of World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II, because the world was a completely different place than what it was when these people were raised. Now, when members of the baby boomers were raised, they were basically taught that everything was all about them, and they were given a lot of privilege as related to their lives. Many of the baby boomers basically had life at its best in this country, and I don't know if they would be able to adapt to America during times when America was at its worst. Now, the boomers would basically be enjoying the roaring 20s, but I don't understand if they would be able to endure things like World War I, where a lot of people were drafted, and they would be able to deal with the Great Depression afterward, because boomers are used to only thinking about themselves, and they're never thinking about the next man in front of them, and that would make it where they would basically have a hard time dealing with those times. And while these individuals would basically try, if they were around, they would be out here fighting the good fight as related to civil rights. They wouldn't really be able to survive the hard economic times, and that would basically impede the country's progress. Now, I also believe that these individuals would not go out here and actively fight in World War II, which was integral to America. World War II was very integral to maintaining our whole society, and these individuals, a lot of these boomers, I believe they were side with the communists and side with people like the Nazis. A lot of these individuals, they wouldn't want to go out here and fight against them, because a lot of these individuals, they were out here protesting the Vietnam War, not understanding the importance of the war as related to World War II. So that wouldn't basically change the way we had our government and put us on the brink as related to our country. That would be a major problem, as I see it, for the baby boomers if they had to go through these hard times. I believe that with the World War I, they wouldn't want to be a part of it and protest it. They would go out here and look to live riotous times through the roaring 20s. And then with the Great Depression, many of these selfish individuals would not really look to go out here and contribute to the country during the hard times of the Depression. And I believe they wouldn't go out here and look to help people during the invasion of Pearl Harbor and look to be a part of World War II. No, they would go out here and just think about themselves, and only think about themselves, and that would leave them open to making the United States into a communist state. So the boomers, I would be scared if these people had to go through those hard times, because they would not look to adapt to the situation in a constructive manner. Now, when it comes down to Gen X, my generation, I think that they might be able to survive these hard times, because we were raised to basically go out here and develop our survival skills at an early age, because most Gen Xers, basically, we came out of the age of feminism and new age parenting, where mothers weren't in the home, and children had to go out here and learn how to adapt in order to survive. And that was something that you would need during the eras of World War I. It's something that you would need during a time of depression like the Great Depression. You would need to learn how to adapt. And I could see a lot of Gen Xers going out here and inventing and improvising, because that's what we did back in the 80s. A lot of us had to go out here and learn how to improvise if we wanted to do things, and we also had to learn how to persevere. So I could see Gen X being very similar to the greatest generation in being the generation that is willing to go out here and make those sacrifices. I see them very similar to the greatest generation and the silent generation in being going out here looking to make those sacrifices to improve the quality of people's lives during the Depression. And I also see many Gen Xers being very patriotic, very similar to the way their silent generation and greatest generation parents were. I see a lot of Gen Xers being very, very patriotic and looking to support the causes of World War II as related to Pearl Harbor, because that's what we saw in many of the movies back then, with the Chuck Norris movies and movies like American Ninja and movies like Red Dawn. We saw a lot of people looking to stand up for their country and show respect for their country. And I could see Gen Xers again being able to adapt to those times because they're used to hard times. And with them being used to hard times, I could see Gen Xers doing well in that era. And I could also see them also looking to push back against a lot of the racism during Jim Crow. I could see them basically looking to elect candidates that would go out here and change the entire political dynamic, because there were a lot of black people back then who were willing to push back. And I could see basically us having it where we could get to a system of justice and eradicate Jim Crow if Gen Xers were a part of that time. Now, when it comes to millennials, I also see them surviving in that era very well, because a lot of those kids were latchkey parents as well. And while the 90s was basically a golden age of a lot of different fun things, like the Power Rangers and many other movies on at the time, and everything being very, very relaxed, I could see a lot of millennials basically adapting to things. And while they may struggle as related to creature comforts, eventually I believe they could go out here and adapt to that era. And I believe that millennials, again, while they had a lot of things given to them, they would have learned to appreciate what they had as related to the Great Depression. Because I believe one of the spoiling of generation millennials, Gen Y, is one of the big problems that they have. But eventually people would adapt and understand the value of what they have and wouldn't take things for granted. Yes, they would have a hard time in the beginning and would basically have these meltdowns. And I believe what would happen is that they would adapt and they would be able to get through it. Now with Gen Z and Generation Alpha, I believe they could go out here and they would be able to survive these eras, because they came up as related to the Great Recession as related to 2008, and the Great Recession is very similar to the Great Depression. And with the Great Recession being very similar to the Great Depression, many of these individuals, again, they had it hard, but they would be able to adapt to the situation because they're used to struggling right now. And again, I believe that Gen Z and Generation Alpha, if they had to go through these hardships, they'll be able to get through them because they've been through the Great Recession, they've been through the pandemic, and I believe that they would be able to adapt to these whole situations. And again, it's all about developing your survival skills. And I believe human beings, again, are very resilient, because human beings by nature have to learn how to adapt to the world, because according to the Bible, God made men to go out here and have dominion over the earth. And that's something that can happen with each generation, and each generation would learn how to adapt to the life situations out here and learn how to overcome those challenges, because the way that they're raised would teach them survival skills, and you would have to adapt, and you would have to learn how to work with what you have. Yes, millennials, Gen Y, and Gen Z, they're raised on computers, but they would learn how to adapt in a world where there was no technology. That's all part of human survival. So when I think about these 5 generations and the struggles they would have, yes, some of them, like the baby boomers, would have it hard, and some like Gen Y and Gen Z and Generation Alpha would struggle as related to technology, but in a couple of years they would learn how to adapt to these conditions and eventually learn how to go on and be able to raise healthy families like their parents did in the past, because the way of the beta male and the feminist would not be functional in those times. You would not be able to bring those approaches to the world in those times, because a beta male is just not suited for survival as related to things, and a man would have to adapt and change his behavior if he hoped to continue on as related to living. The same thing with the feminist indoctrinated woman. She would have to learn how to work with men, because after a couple of years of seeing herself basically being out here and struggling on her own as related to the low wages and low paying jobs, she would have to go out here and shift gears. And again, this is all what happens as related to people. The times can go out here and change a person's behavior, and they can go out here and learn to survive. And again, with each generation, they may be raised in different times, but the whole thing is, if they had to come up in those times, they would have to learn what they needed in order to survive. So this scenario is a very interesting one, and I'm glad my viewer gave it to me to talk about, and I'm glad I could share this whole scenario with everybody, because it's one that really makes me think about how blessed we are and how much of a good time we are in right now, and how we really need to appreciate where we are right now, because we could have had it as hard as our previous generations, our mothers, our grandmothers, and our great-grandmothers, and our ancestors. And we really have to thank God that they went through those hard times so that we could go out here and enjoy the benefits of the life we have today. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App, and if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to also help out the channel, you can pick up some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, like books in the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, and many of my men's issues books. You can find all those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com. You can also find them in digital format at other online booksellers like Smashware's The iBookstore and Google Play. And you can also find SJS Direct books at Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. The man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.